Hello everybody, and today we're going to begin working with your curriculum guides. Now hopefully you were able to identify a specific grade level and subject you want to work with this semester, and that your district has something to guide you as far as the district curriculum goes. It depends on the district you're in. Some districts are a little bit more in the proactive mode and have these documents on hand. Other districts, though, may not have anything. They may just say our curriculum is the state standards and use that as a curriculum. Wherever you find yourself on that spectrum of being nothing but the state standards all the way up to a district curriculum, I want you to take, again, a specific grade level subject and identify that, and that's what you're going to work with. So in the reading from yesterday, you read about the written, taught, and assessed curriculum. So just a little bit of a clarification there of what that is. The assessed curriculum or tested curriculum is what the state gives, and think of that as your state standard. So that's only one piece of this triangle dealing with curriculum. The taught curriculum is what the teachers use and teach from to guide their instruction. So with that said, you can see where those two things have to be aligned. The written curriculum, what the teachers teach, in other words, what the district has as a curriculum, and the tested curriculum, what the state based the assessments on. Those things have to be aligned. And that third piece in there is the taught curriculum. And that's actually what the teachers deliver in the classroom. And so when all three of those things are in alignment, then it's going to be easy for us to work with all kinds of students and to actually go beyond what is required or is expected of the state. So anyway, that's what we're going to build on. Okay, that model there of the written, taught, and assessed curriculum. And what you're developing in these curriculum guides is actually the written curriculum. This is what the district would have, or what you as a principal would use to help guide your teachers through the content. And so we're going to see that there are 5 parts to a quality curriculum guide for a written curriculum. And the first 2 things we're going to work with this week and then at the beginning of next week, and that is working with objectives. How do we know what to teach? And then prerequisites. What do students need to know up front? Okay, so that's where we're going with this presentation. So let's examine your document. So here, if we were in class, we would talk about what you're able to find in your district. Again, if your district doesn't have anything, don't worry. I'm going to kind of be working alongside you and building a curriculum so that you can see what it looks like as we're going. And I'm going to use high school history. I'm a former history teacher, so I will use high school U.S. history, 1865 to the current. Okay, and so that's where we're going to go with that. But take a look at your documents you have, whether it's somewhat detailed or nothing. I promise you will add to it, and you might even take away or move some of the stuff to an appendix that's in your current curriculum documents if you do have something. So when we're looking at curriculum, we're asking ourselves 4 big questions of curriculum, whatever it is. So think of your curriculum guide that you have right now. So the first question then, is it there? Do you have a curriculum guide? So some of you are probably saying, yes, I do. This is telling me what I need to teach. Many of you may call it a year at a glance or something along those lines. Some of you may not. Some of you may say, my guide is the state standards. So in that sense, we might give you a little bit of credit there because you have something that you're using as a guide. If your textbook is your guide, I guess we could still give you a tiny bit of credit for is it there, but we're going to see very quickly that the quality is not there. The product may be there, but the quality is not there. So this is a part of design. Okay, you're going to hear a couple of words used throughout our course, design and delivery. So the first thing we ask about your curriculum guide, is it there? And this is, of course, design. The next thing, is it any good? And this is also design. So these are the things that we're going to work with in this course. I'm going to show you how to design quality curriculum documents for your content areas and then ultimately for the school as well. Okay, so is it there? If it is or not, doesn't matter. Is it any good? And so here we're looking at the quality, and this is where we're really going to concentrate our course. The other two questions we would ask would be in delivery. And this is the delivery of the curriculum. This is what the teachers are doing. We're not going to address this in our course, but I wanted to give you these so you can see what the next steps would be. The next question is it being used? In other words, are the teachers using the curriculum documents that you have? Did you use these in the past if you were in this district? And then finally, the last question, also dealing with delivery, is does it make a difference? In other words, are your students succeeding because of this curriculum guide that you're using? So those are 4 questions. The 2 terms are design and delivery, and for this course we're going to concentrate just on the design. And really the part that we're going to concentrate within design is the question, is it any good? And so I'm going to show you how to create quality documents as we go through the course. So what about standards? Why do we have standards? Are they good or bad? And then I would have you do something on your own in groups and we would discuss out. But let me share with you some thoughts on state standards. So personally, I don't have an issue with standards. I think that you need to have something to guide what you're doing. I'll give you an example. The first time I taught AP US History, I was a fairly new teacher. Didn't even understand the concept of advanced placement. I thought it was a chance to teach a specialty class like I took in college. And so I told the principal, I said, let's apply for a grant and get one of the AP grants from the state. And I want to build a class around the 1960s. And we can talk about the 60s and all that was going on in the United States. So without standards then, students taking that class might learn the 60s very well, but they're not going to learn all the other stuff that they need to know about U.S. history since the Civil War. So I say all that to say that standards are a baseline that we need to gauge what we're teaching students. And so in that sense, I think they're good. Now, I'm not saying that all standards are good quality standards. In fact, one of the things about the design of your curriculum guides is that ultimately you would do this in a team, and as a team you would figure out where the quality is lacking in the state standards, and you would build those missing pieces into your curriculum guides. And you would do that in the prerequisites, as we would see. But overall, I think that you have to agree that standards, or I would hope that you would agree that standards are they're an important piece because they give us direction in what we're teaching. And we're not just talking about state standards here, though we're going to look at state standards, but also national standards. And there are national standards for just about all core content areas. and a lot of specific core subjects. Some of your electives, there may be national standards, but again, you need to build on those because the quality's not there. I'll give you an example of this. I also taught Spanish, and the national standards for Spanish talk about culture and language and things like that. At least they did when I was in the classroom. What they didn't talk about was what we actually taught as far as grammar. So anybody who's ever taken a foreign language class know that the culture is a part of what you learn, but a big part of it really is culture. And I mean, not culture, grammar, dealing with grammar. So in Spanish 1, you learn about basic grammar things, adjectives, nouns, demonstrative adjectives, articles, singular, plural. You learn a lot about verbs, you learn about irregular verbs, and all this is in the present tense. If you're lucky, you might get to the preterite tense by the end of Spanish 1. If not, you start Spanish 2 in the preterite tense. But nowhere in the national standards does it really talk about grammar in the way it's taught. Okay, so this is where we would add to our curriculum guides just what we expect to see. So this is an example of why you can't just go by standards. But again, standards give us a baseline of where we should be starting. So let's take a look at the Oklahoma standards. Okay, and what I want to show you here is how we first go about what we're doing. So how do we know what to teach? Well, we start with the Oklahoma standards. And this, we could say, is the tested curriculum. One part of that triangle from your readings. But there are some gaps in there. And we're going to fill those in with the written curriculum. But keep in mind this basic idea. So there are 175 teaching days in our classes. Okay? So let's put that up. 175 days. Research shows that of this class period, 75% is devoted to instruction. In other words, that other 25% of those 175 days is used for maybe a pep assembly, snow days, interruptions. So that 175 days, we can't assume that's bell to bell for 175 days. So if we have 175 days of instruction, research shows that 25% of that is used for other things in general. So the first thing we need to do is figure out that we have about 131 days of full instruction. So then what we do is we know that our standards that we have from the state are used for our state assessments. And we know that we typically take state tests about a month before school ends. So we need to back off that 131 by another 20 days. So what this does, this tells us that we have about 111 to 115 or so days of instruction. And the reason this is important is because now you know that you have to cover all the standards, use them as a guide to help you create your curriculum. You have to cover the curriculum within those standards in about 112 to 115 days. So it can't be from day 1 to day 175 at the beginning of May. You have to finish before that state assessment. So we say now work with your standards to know what you're going to teach and when. So this is going to be the first part of your assignment that is due Friday. And what this is I want you to figure out how many days you're going to dedicate to each unit that you decide, whether it's an objective or whatever. How many days you're going to dedicate. I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about in just a second by looking at the U.S. history standards and the beginning of a curriculum document for U.S. history. So basically you have about, again, 112 to 115 days. So if you had 9 big standards you wanted to cover, how are you going to divide them up into that 112 days? That's a great question. Okay, and so the next thing then is to look at blueprints. So what I want to do is actually look at the blueprint for U.S. history. And so we can pull up the State Department website here. Now this says these are all old, out-of-date blueprints, but we're going to use it anyway. So there are your math and reading, science, geography. So let's look at history. Here's the blueprint for U.S. history. Oops, this is 8th grade. Grade 8. We don't want grade 8. U.S. history blueprint. So what this is going to tell us is how many standards we have to cover. So here we can see that we have 6 overall standards that we have to cover for U.S. history. Let's make this a little bit bigger. But more importantly, it tells us underneath the substandards within each of these and what percentage of the test is covered by the standard. So here is standard 1. And you can see here that we have 3 substandards under this. There are a total of 8 out of 60 questions on the state test from standard 1, which covers about 13 to 15% of the test. Now this is important because if you're an American history teacher, the first thing you see here is transformation in the United States from post-Reconstruction to the Progressive Era, 1878 to 1900. So what that tells me as an American history teacher is I'm not going to have any tests prior or any test items prior to this time period, save a couple of things in here that we're going to look at. Okay, but in other words, when you look at the U.S. history textbook, it begins and the first 4 chapters of the book are all review. So if I spend a month, and keep in mind I have about 8 months max to work on preparing students for their end of course assessment. If I spend the first month on something that's not covered at all, I just spent 13% of my time on something that's not even going to be covered on the assessment. So what I can do is highlight those key things and actually start pretty much around 1878 and talk about what's going to be on the assessment. And I'm going to give you an example of what this actually looks like when we write it down. But so to give you another example of this, a typical math book, if you start on page 1 of a typical math textbook, the first 20 to 25% of that book is review of the previous course. The middle 60% is new material on grade level. And then the last 20% or so is looking forward to the next grade level. So again, in math, if you start on page 1, you're going to waste about 20% of your time dealing with things that students had learned in a previous class, and you're not even going to start touching on things that are covered in that course until well after a month into school. So that's a lot of wasted time. And so 2 things you're going to get out of this presentation here are, number 1, your actual objectives and what they cover, and number 2, prerequisites for students to understand before they can even attempt to deal with those objectives. So one more thing here real quick, and then we're going to go back to the PowerPoint. What we can see here is typically, when I used to teach high school American history, by about Christmas, we would be up to about World War I. But you can see here, according to this, that up through World War I, and I'm just going to tell you this if you didn't understand it, you should be into World War I by the end of this Standard 2, the expanding role of the United States in international affairs. This covers World War I. So this is going to be about 25% of the test, which should mean that you have about 25% of your class dedicated to this. So by the end of the first 25% of your class, which again, if we're talking 8 months, 2 months in, you start in August, September, by the middle of October, you should be up to World War I. And I just said that typically I never reached World War I until after Christmas. So what happens then is we don't get to the end of this stuff down here, and we're lucky to get to the 1970s, and what happens is this stuff is not covered. So 20% of the material on the state assessment the student's never been exposed to, if we go by the way I used to teach. But this is why standards are a good thing, because they help guide us into this. So what we can see then is if we're going to spend about 13 to 15% of our the test is spent dealing with Standard 1, we want to spend about 13 to 15% of our instructional time dealing with Standard 1. And the same down here. So according to this model, we should be up to the Cold War, meaning past World War II. We should be up to the Cold War right before Christmas. So I was completely off target when I used to teach American history based upon the blueprint. So that's how you use blueprints. So if we know that we have 112 to 115 days to teach, then what I would suggest is figuring out how much you're going to spend teaching each of these major objectives based upon this percentage here. So 112 times 13%, 112 times 10%, so that's 12 days or so here. I'm going to spend half my time teaching stuff since World War II, because half of the items on the assessment are since World War II. So that's how you use a blueprint. Okay. Let's get back to our presentation. So that's how you use that. Now, what you're going to do, this is the first thing I want you to do for your curriculum guide. Okay. And this is just in Excel. What I've done is I have labeled it a unit, however you want to define your unit, but units are easy to deal with. The number of days I'm going to spend on this unit, and the objectives. What objectives am I going to cover? We'll fill in the rest of this later. All you're doing for your assignment that you're going to submit Friday is you're going to identify the units, the number of days you're going to spend on that unit, and the specific objective that you're going to cover. And let me give you an example of what that looks like. So let's pull up here. So if we were to pull up the standards for U.S. history. So now we have the Oklahoma Academic Standards for U.S. history for high school, 1878 to the present. That's what our blueprint said. So if we scan down through here, first of all, we have a couple of process and literacy standards that we will work on incorporating at a later time. Okay, so there's Standard 1, Process and Literacy, Standard 2. But I want to get to the content standard. So here's our first content standard, and it's a long one. But what it does is it incorporates those 3 substandards I said earlier. And now we can look through here and see what the content standard is and what these substandards are and any specific things mentioned underneath the substandards. Okay, so this we said had 13 to 15% of our time dedicated to standard 1, or the blueprint's at 13 to 15% of the test items dedicated to standard 1, so we want to correspond our class time to that as well. What that means is that based on 112 to 115 days and 13 to 15%, we want to spend about anywhere from 13 to 17 days on this. So let me show you how I come up with that. Let's pull up the calculator. So let's take the low end, 112 times 13%, that's 15 days. And the high end, 115 days times 15%, 17. So 15 to 17 days or so we would spend on dealing with the content standard 1. So what would that look like then? So let me show you what that looks like. So here I have content standard 1. The student will analyze the transformation of the United States through the civil rights struggles, immigrant experiences, settlement of the American West, and the industrialization of the American society in the post-Reconstruction through the progressive eras, 1865 to 1900. So I have 17 days I can spend on this. These are the 3 sub areas. And what I've done is I've just determined that the first one here, actually, I'll probably change this 2 to 3 days. So again, this comes from the blueprint, knowing how many questions are coming from this specific sub area. Let's see if we can get back to our blueprint. U.S. history blueprints. Yeah, so this one says 17%. We saw 13 to 50%. This may be the newest. No, I don't think this is the newest, but you get the idea of how to use this, okay? So 17%, they're going to be 2 to 4 questions on post-Reconstruction amendments. So what does that mean? That means that if we look at our standards, post-Reconstruction amendment, 2 to 4 questions. So what I've done is this is what you're going to do for Friday. You're going to tell me the major content standard, and if there are any substandards, you can break it down into substandards if you want. It makes it easier here, but you can see here that I've said that we need to spend at least 17 days on this. And then I've broken it down into substandards that were given in the guide. So this is the first assignment you're going to do, okay? You're going to list the standard, you're going to list the major objective, or the substandard here, and the number of days for each. So let's get back to our presentation. So when you're dealing with your objectives, here's what you need to keep in mind, okay? For each of your units, and remember we're going by units, for each of your units you need to provide an objective. And these will be rated on a scale of 0 to 3. And in the end of this course you're going to rate your own, by the way. So if you list no objective, you get a 0. If you list some form of objective, but vague, you get a 1. if you list the state standard, okay, and this is really the state standard here, you're going to get a 2. In order to receive a 3, you need to state for each objective the what, when, meaning sequence within the course, and how the actual standard is performed and the amount of time being spent on learning. So you can see that we're moving into that number 3 rating because we're putting the days in there, and you can address some of the other things to raise it up to a 3. But you should be falling somewhere in between a 2 and a 3 on these ratings as we go through them. So that's what you're going to do for Friday, okay, is you're going to create that document for the whole year and tell me how many days in the year so that you finish with your major instruction somewhere probably, you know, that 30 days of wasted instruction varies. So probably in the end you want to come out with somewhere around 130 days, 140 at the most, of instruction that you're going to give your students for the area, okay, for your course. That last 30 to 40 days you're going to take up with testing, and then the time after testing you're going to take up with getting ready for the next course in the sequence, or doing some specialty work in your content area, however you want to use that last time after the test is done. And we know it's sometimes a difficult time for students. So this is what you're going to do for Friday. So then let's move to what you're going to work with over the weekend. And here we have to ask ourselves, do all students start at the same place? And the answer is a resounding no. We know they don't. So we know that when a student comes into 8th grade, that some students are ahead, whether it's in reading or simple knowledge. They're ahead, they're working at a high school level, and we know that some students are behind. And this is true even as low as kindergarten. We know that students come into kindergarten, some are ahead and some are behind. And so we cannot neglect either of those groups of students. And so if we agree, and hopefully we all agree, that not everybody is starting at the same place, if we agree with that fundamental statement, then we cannot treat everybody the same way. And so what we need to do is first determine what it is that the students need to know in order to do the work, the objective that we have lined out. And so in order to gauge this, we want to list prerequisites. This is your second thing. You're going to do this over the weekend, okay? So let me give you an example of what that looks like. So here's a basic idea of some prerequisites here. We're going to color code these in a different color since these are due at a different time. So the stuff in yellow addresses the objective. The stuff in green addresses the prerequisite. So if I had a student coming into history and we were going to teach about post-Reconstruction, and we dealt with specifically the post-Reconstruction amendments, then I need to add Reconstruction here. So these are some things that students have to come in with a knowledge about, okay? They need to know the causes and the outcomes of the Civil War, because the post-Reconstruction amendments are going to address those things. They need to know about, I said that was kind of redundant, the outcomes of the Civil War. And they need to know about Reconstruction, the basic idea of what Reconstruction was from 1865 to 1878. And so once they get these things, once we know that they have them, then we can move forward and make sure that they get the post-Reconstruction amendments. Okay, but This is just the prerequisites. So earlier I said that the tested curriculum, typically what we see as a state curriculum, has gaps in it. This is where you can help fill in some of those gaps. So if we know, for example, that, and I'm just throwing this out there, this is not necessarily the case. Let's say that 4th grade math says that students will be able to add and subtract double-digit numbers. And nothing about multiplication or division. And then we look and suddenly we see in 5th grade students are going to learn how to multiply and divide double-digit numbers. Well, they haven't even worked with multiplication and division with single-digit numbers. So maybe we need to back up as a prerequisite. The students need to be able to understand the concept of multiplication of single-digit numbers and the division of single-digit numbers, and then they can advance into double-digit or triple-digit or whatever you're going to do. But you can see how there might be some gaps in there. This is where you're going to fill that in. And later on, when we talk about assessments, and this is somewhat filled in, but I'm going to fill it in as we go through our course, so I'm working and doing this with you. What you can do then is realize, oh, well, these students don't understand what Reconstruction is, because when they took history in the 8th grade, they only made it to the end of the Civil War. They actually didn't cover Reconstruction. And so that tells me that I'm going to have to squeeze in 2 or 3 extra days to give them a complete coverage of Reconstruction so that they will understand where the Reconstruction amendments fit into the whole concept here, what we're talking about. And so the same if you discovered, oh my gosh, these students have never learned to multiply or divide, and here we have to go to double digits. Well, I need to spend a few days, maybe 3 days on how to multiply and 3 days on how to divide. That's why we have prerequisites in here, so that we can check that to see if the students understand. And if they don't, we can build that stuff in real quickly and get the students ready to understand the content that we're dealing with. I will say the first prerequisites for the first objective are always the toughest, because you're building on the previous class for the most, for everything. Once you get past that, then the prerequisites should start getting easier to understand, because you're simply building on your own class. Okay, so that will make sense as you go through, I promise. So just like with the objectives, prerequisites also have a rating of 0 to 4. 0, there is no mention of a required skill. Number 1, or a rating of 1, would state a prior general experience needed. So I would probably give that maybe a 1, what I just wrote up there, but I threw it up there for you. A 2 states prior general experience needed in specified grade level. So what I would need to do then to go back and change that to a 2 would be to put that this came from 8th grade U.S. history, because that's where it came from. Number 3 states specified documented prerequisite or description of a discrete skill or concept required prior to this learning. Maybe scope and sequence across grades. Here again, I would address more specifically what the students learned in the 8th grade, and I would probably bring in some of those literacy skills as well as part of it to get that full 3. Okay, so this is what you're doing over the weekend. So just to recap, Friday, you're going to submit your first curriculum document, and again, divide it up like this. Okay, so you're going to tell me the unit, the days, and the objectives. Then you're going to tell me the prerequisites. This next block is going to be prerequisites. So objective, prerequisite. So your objectives with units divided into days for the whole year, and also with major objectives for each unit, are due Friday, July the 6th. And then over the weekend, you're going to add prerequisites. So you're going to take the same document You're going to add a new column. So along with your units divided into days for each year and also with the major objectives for each unit, and you're going to add the prerequisites needed for each objective. So if you have questions, I'm here to help. Okay? But once you get started in this process, you're going to see that this is very easy to do. It's just this initial starting to see how you're going to lay out your documents so that they're easy to read. And keep in mind, this is the last thing we'll do. Keep in mind that what you're doing is you're creating this document for all teachers, but especially for your brand new teachers who come in and have just the minimum skills needed to teach a class. And I was that first year teacher who thought, I'm just going to start on page 1 or wherever. I had no concept of prerequisite skills when I started teaching. Or I may have, and I've forgotten them by the time I got in the classroom. But so this is who you're really creating these documents for, those new teachers or those struggling teachers where they can really use the guidance here in their planning. So with that, good luck. If you need any help, have any questions, contact me and I'll be here to help you.